You are listening to Creating Active Lives with me, Sarah Blytho, and my regular weekly guests, and we are all here to share the research, the science, and the strategies, as well as some of the fun, to help you to create a more active life. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Creating Active Lives, and my guest, Fiona Winter. Fiona and I actually have quite a lot of parallels, which we'll find out more about as we go through the episode, but she's based in South Wales and she's a somatic movement educator, an embodied facilitator and coach. And Fiona's going to tell us exactly what that is in a bit, but she's been facilitating, mentoring, coaching and training others for over 40 years and specialises in very much a holistic health and well-being, in movement, in body awareness, personal development, and one of the most important things for me, fun. And like me, Fiona's very much a believer that we need to be moving more, not necessarily exercising, but moving, but also that we need to be doing more of it outside. So Fiona, tell us a little bit about yourself and we'll move into why we just want to get everybody outside.
Well, thanks for the introduction, Sarah. Yeah, it's interesting. 40 odd years ago, my exercise to music classes were called Fitness with Fiona the Fun Way. And I don't think I've ever left that behind. So I actually came from a dance background, worked professionally for a few years, but I was always interested in teaching people to dance who perhaps hadn't danced before. And that then moved over into the fitness industry in the early 80s. So my focus was always, how can I get more people interested in having the sort of joy and fun that I have out of moving, whether that's dancing or, as it was then, exercise to music, who've never done it before. And I was curious. So I've involved myself very much with people stepping onto that ladder. And that's taken me through into teacher training, training people to teach people who are new to fitness, but also in my own work in community, going into areas where there wouldn't necessarily be perhaps a seniors fitness class before, or people hadn't had that opportunity. So that's been a thread that's gone through all my work, through teacher training that I've done, through a lot of work with community in the Welsh Valleys, projects around walking, getting people up to a 2-mile walk, and now actually even online and working with groups like people with MS or people with Parkinson's, and the new projects that I'm doing, Move in Nature and Dancing in the Dark.
Which we will talk about. And it's really interesting you're saying about sort of bringing the fun back into it and teaching people and things, because I think anyone who's got children, who's observed children, who's grandchildren or whatever, put any kind of rhythm on, and it could be music, it could just be any rhythm, and there's an instinct to move, and there's no pressure, there's no consciousness, self-consciousness or anything. Kids just move, they move. Do you think somewhere along the line we kind of unlearn that?
Oh, definitely. We go from not realizing we're being observed to being acutely aware that we might be being observed. And so one of the things that I've done is brought in much more of a somatic approach to the work. So rather than instructing people, which of course, some people then perhaps do what you're asking them to do, even if they don't want to, and even if it's not quite right for them, is offering invitations. How about you try this? I invite you to give this a go. Do it your way. So very much my work has moved over from that teaching to perhaps what I would call facilitating, or just holding the space for people and providing a container for them to explore what is possible. And, I think that's another phrase, what's possible and what's possible today. Because some of the groups I work with, what they could do last week, they can't do this week for all sorts of reasons.
Yeah.
So, and especially when...
And I think...
Go on, Sarah.
Go on. I was going to say, I think in all of us, there is an instinct, there is an innate sense of rhythm, sense of movement, but we kind of, we move in much stricter kind of formats. And like you say, people kind of, they've forgotten how to move their bodies, or they're conscious of moving their bodies. And I think it's something that, when you're on your own and the music comes on, you have a little bit of a bop around. But actually what you do is bring that out in a much more creative and I want to use the word fulfilling, but I think it is.
I think you're right.
The way it's fulfilling, isn't it? Because you
Every
Yeah,
individual is doing in my
yeah,
sessions, whether it's whether it's a dance fitness sort of session or whether it's something outside, they're doing it their way, and I'm bringing autonomy to that. And if you think how we're brought up in the school system, the teachers are always right, then you're at college and the lecturers are always right, and you're always having your work assessed, and someone's telling you if it's okay, and that actually goes into fitness classes, sports training. And so to allow people that opportunity to sense, is this okay for me? And it doesn't have to be okay for me just because it's okay for someone else. And then of course, when you're outside, there's that whole thing of, oh my goodness, people might be watching. And it's very interesting to watch how quickly people don't start to care whether anybody's watching or not, especially when they're really feeling the
yeah.
benefit.
You're talking to somebody who's been known to skip the entire length of the Roald Dahl Pass in Cardiff Bay, just for the sheer fun of it because it was a lovely day. And you know what? I think after a while you don't really care. So what actually inspired you to take people outdoors, to start
I think
taking
there's
people
two
outside?
strands. I've always benefited from being outdoors ever since I've started gardening, which I probably did in my 40s, and I'm now in my mid 60s. So I've always enjoyed that. And then when COVID came along, like pretty much everybody else in the industry of activity, movement, dance, fitness, I went online. And then I started to see people using the silent disco headsets. And what I saw was they would take their class outside, stand in a circle, stand in rows in one spot and do the class. And I thought, well, that's great, but I'm sure we could get way more creative with it. What if we had a different view for every track of music? What if, in fact, some of the movement was walking from one place to another? So I started to sketch out an idea of what I wanted to do, and I called it Move in Nature, the very first project I did. And I happened to contact my local arts development team, who I worked with quite a lot. I've always sort of straddled arts and health with the work that I do. I can wear either hat, and it's usually the same work. It just depends how they want to view it. But I happened to ring them up on the day that they'd been basically instructed to get people outside. And so they were very keen to help me set up the project. So went off, purchased 20 headsets and took a class outside. But right from the beginning, I wanted people to connect to the place that they were in. And then, of course, as soon as you're outside, you're connecting to the weather. You're connecting to what you can see. You're not in four walls. You're not in front of a mirror. You haven't necessarily got the instructor in front of you. And over the first few months, I started to develop the project and explore different ways of bringing the movement, because I didn't just want to do a movement exercise class outside. I wanted people to explore mindful movement, but also elements of forest bathing, and the connecting with nature. And of course, as soon as you're outside, there's just so much else to see. But having the headset on allows me literally to offer invitations into people's ears. So they actually get a much better experience of a high quality sound. So the music, rather than being just something that's background, it's something that's enhancing the experience. So that's how I first got into it. And I was really lucky that the project, for the first 6 months, went really, really well. And then I actually had a year of funding to literally do one session a week for a whole year. Yeah, so other things grew out of that.
What sort of challenges did you face with it? Because I mean, obviously, the headset's great and everything, but were there other challenges that came up? Or
Yeah, I mean, if you talk about a risk assessment that as a teacher you're always doing in a room, then take people outside. You've got a lot of different risks. I mean, luckily, we both have that background with working with walking projects. So that was sort of common sense to me. I already had that background of training others. But there was a different element to it, because I was actually asking people to move on uneven ground, not just walk on it, but dance on it. And where were the right spaces to do that? And if I'm taking up people up steps in a park, then some people might be very happy going up a step, but as you and I will know from our work with different target groups, not every knee wants to go down a step. So I was literally having to think of routes that would accommodate as many people as I could. I didn't want to make it inaccessible. And I actually started to get a lot of people who really hadn't done much movement at all. They almost were coming for what they saw as a walk. Um, and I think one of the biggest challenges was, I could have just walked from a start point to a viewpoint and it would have taken me 10 minutes. But add in the sort of target groups I'm working with and the fact that people are looking at leaves and inspecting the moss on the ground, and we want to stand and look around. I actually had to change a lot of my timings. So the walks necessarily aren't fast, but they're still following a structure of, a typical fitness class with a warm up, a conditioning phase in the center, and relaxation at the end. Um, Technically, the actual silent headsets are really simple to use. They're quite simple to instruct people to use. Really haven't had any difficulties with that. I think other challenges really are the weather. There would be plenty of people who wouldn't think to go out in the rain. Um, and I think in sort of 3 years, I've only ever cancelled about 3 classes for inclement weather. We've gone out in the rain. We've gone out. We've had hail and a rainbow in one session.
Oh,
But actually,
wow.
once people realise, they've been out in a bit of drizzle and they think, well, actually, that was quite nice. I feel better now I've come back. They'll take the chance and they'll come out
It's that
again.
connection with nature.
Yeah, yeah. It's the elements
But
as
it,
long
it's
as
rain is part of nature, isn't it? Yeah. And we, I mean, I'm not going to go too much into like what we're made of, but if you actually break everything down as the elements in our bodies, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, whatever, carbon, um, there's the same elements in nature, in the weather, in everything, and actually being able to link in with the rain, it's a great feeling. And like everybody says, there's no such thing as the wrong weather for being outside. It's just the wrong clothing,
they're on
and
clothes.
getting
Yeah, I
used to
actually
that.
talk a lot about the elements, because you've got the element of fire from the sun, but also if you've heated up yourself or you literally feel a fire in your belly, there's that element there. There's air on the skin as well as the breath that we're taking in. There's the grounding, the landing on the ground through our feet, having a stable base, but then also feeling the different textures. And then, as you say, the rain on our skin, the moisture in our mouth, and just knowing that we're made up of a high percentage of water. So, yeah, the elements and the seasons actually come in very strongly
See,
to the work that I do.
the seasons is something I feel really quite passionate about, because I think we, again, because of modern life, the way it is, technology, electricity, everything, great, wonderful things, don't get me wrong, but we've kind of lost that real connection with the seasons, with the food from each season. If you think even back sort of 50, 60 years, a lot more people grew their own food. So you had what was in season, and it's almost like what's in season is right for your digestion, for your gut, for your system, for your energy needs. And, if you think about it, the different colors of the season. So it must be lovely to be out there in different seasons and see how nature changes,
Yes.
but still stays the
And I think
same, but it changes.
that's a massive benefit of the year program that I did, is we were in the same venue.
Yeah.
So I did have a couple of slightly different walks, but week after week, people were coming back to the same piece of ground, the same trees, and noticing the small, subtle differences. And that was revelationary for some people. And I also found that on every walk we did, different people spotted different things. So at the end of every walk, we have an opportunity to feedback if we want to, maybe something we noticed, something we're taking away with us, something that happened. And I've been amazed at how many different things. Somebody would say, "Oh, I saw mushrooms." So it's like, "Oh, I'm going to look for those next week." So yeah, that chance to closely observe week by week, season by season was quite new for a lot of people.
It's good, and it is. It's. I think we just take the outdoors, we take nature for granted. We take the seasons for granted because our lives don't change, whereas they would have done in going back many years. We would have been in a lot more in the winter and out a lot more in the summer. And it's just so nice to kind of reintroduce people to that aspect of who we are. We are creatures that live in nature. And I just think, and I was just thinking the other day, I know it sounds really daft, but I do a lot of hiking in Colorado, where obviously there's a lot of the mountains, and it's the tree line. The tree line goes up so far, and then it's like, yeah, no, not going up there any further. But there's always one tree that's a little bit further up, which is like, ha, ha, I'm up here. And it's almost like nature's, it's almost like these things are having a bit of a laugh, and it's because there'll always be something that is where it shouldn't be, or there'll be a tree growing in a place that you think, how on earth? And it's just like nature. Yeah, see, I can do this, but you start to notice it. You start to get in tune with things like that, and I just think it's just incredible, isn't it? What you start to notice when you start looking. You
Well, I've actually worked quite a lot in collaboration with people who work with predominantly women, looking at journaling and particularly connected with perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause, but also the menstrual cycle. So a lot of the work around that actually alludes to spring, summer, autumn, winter. That could be your menstrual cycle, but it also might be your cycle as a woman, from mother, maiden, queen, crone. So I've actually done quite a lot of work around that, working with other people. So providing, for instance, a playlist that might be very spring-like, and providing prompts for people about how they might have felt when they were in the spring in their lives. And actually working with women of all ages, so that the 40-year-olds have a chance to talk to the 50-year-olds and the 50-year-olds to the 60-year-olds. So it's kind of bringing those cycles in as well. And that knowing that after winter, spring will come again. So I'm technically postmenopausal and in my second spring, as it's often called. So it's been fascinating to make those links. And then I think the other thing you mentioned was, being in the sunlight, seeing how that differs. So, for instance, I'm going out tonight to actually take people out in the dark, but we're having to start at 8:30, whereas last month we started at 7:30, and a few months ago we could have started at 6:30. And, next month we'll probably start at 9, just because of the light changing in the day. So that's another aspect people have noticed. But, for me, if I can just mention the other project that's come out of this is dancing in the dark.
yeah, I
So
love
I
the
think
sound of it.
well, we do have very small LED torches, powerful but light, and that's probably all we need. And I do make sure we're extra safe on the route that we take. But of course, how many women would go out and be active in a park in the dark? I mean, not a lot would go out on their own in the day, but certainly not in the dark. It's not something you would do away from street lights, away from house lights. So I'm taking 26, I think, people out tonight. And I first did it on Halloween. I thought, how that might be quite fun to do that for Halloween. And then winter solstice came up. Maybe we'll do it for that. And now I've been doing it for over 2 years. Every month, we usually tie in with the full moon, the night of, or the night before or after. And of course, the moon doesn't always help because the clouds are often covering. But as I say, the moon is always there. We just might not see it. But it's been an absolute revelation to see people feel so empowered to be out in the darkness.
But
And again,
also, I
another
think as
level
women,
of not being observed by people, not being
yeah,
seen.
but it's also as women, I think we have a very specific connection to the moon, don't
Of
we? And
course, yeah, and our
and
cycles,
so to be able
yeah,
to even it's like you say, you can see the moon or you can't see the moon. It's still there. So the energy's
still
still
there.
there. And I think for women to be able to go out with a full moon and just everything that kind of gives you is just what an amazing experience for people. It just sounds amazing. It
Mm.
really does.
And I think we've also normalized in the couple of parks that I work in, we've normalized groups of women dancing outside. It's people who walk their dog on a Sunday morning are used to seeing us. Um, and it's like, oh, it's those women again with the headsets.
Yeah,
And I think that's fabulous because, women do need to be seen. We need to take up our space
we
and we
do.
have a right to be out
And,
and moving.
and obviously, like you say, there's safety in numbers, but there's also confidence in numbers, isn't there? And there's connection in numbers. And those are two things that I think a lot of women um, miss. They've kind of let it go because they're doing other things, and it's that connection and that
Mm.
confidence in numbers that sometimes just, even if it's not somebody you'd meet up for a coffee afterwards. It's just being around people. That social connection is something we do the school run. We do
And I
help.
think it's
Yeah,
happened with this group, we've got quite a lot of people who've got some health challenges. For instance, I'm taking someone out tonight who had a stroke 9 months ago, who'd walked with me before, and they're now ready to come back. I've got someone else who's undergoing cancer treatment. I've got a couple of people in their 80s. So the building of that confidence that this is something that they can do, but also that connection. And it's not, as you say, it's not come because they're necessarily going out for coffee afterwards, but actually it's a shared experience that they've had. And that's why at the end of every walk, we always have a few moments to share. It's not compulsory. No one has to share. But it's just that opportunity of speaking out loud something that's happened or that you've noticed, and knowing that that's valid and other people will hear that and maybe have had the same experience themselves. So yeah, a lot of connection and confidence has come out of both projects actually.
And it sounds like as well, it's not just kind of like the physical safety of going out in a group, but it's also that emotional safety of knowing that you can share or you can not share. It's a safe environment for that.
Yeah, and I think that's where it differs quite a lot from, say, the walking projects that both of us have been linked to in the training of others and the development at that. I'm holding quite a tender space for people. When you add music in, and particularly if you're not just using the regular type of fitness music, which is a beat and it doesn't really matter what it is as long as the beat's there. I'm actually using very different music than I would have used in other classes. So I'm looking for atmospheric music that picks up on the seasons. I'm using spoken word. um, I'm using a lot of instrumental music, so it almost taps into the emotions much quicker, and therefore it's not unknown for people to say, gosh, I felt really emotional when that track came on. And then as the person holding that space, I need to be able to hold that for people, to let them know that that's quite normal and it's okay. um, and so it is a little bit different than perhaps a fitness instructor taking people out. So I think my whole background in dance has really, and the work that I do in the arts has really, really helped with that, because I understand that emotional connection to the music choices and how that might affect the session. So I think I probably spend way more time organizing a playlist than anything else. I probably spent 2 hours yesterday, and that was working with a lot of music I already knew to get the perfect playlist for what is the pink moon.
Yes. And it's things like that that I think it's that um, the, the additional benefits. We've talked about some of the benefits that people feel, but what other benefits have you noticed, or have people told you that they're experiencing?
Well, if we just look at the physical, mobility, huge, particularly for people who haven't really been walking very much before. But also, when you're walking, you're not necessarily using your upper body. Whereas if inviting people to move and dance, even if it's very, very simple. So occasionally I might ask people to follow me if they want to, so that we're using upper body more. Cardiovascular endurance, just being out for longer. We're often going up inclines, not very steep, but for some people, they're more than they would do normally. Massive mental health benefits. Just saying, I feel so much better than I did when I came out. I had a not so great day, but now that I've forgotten about that, or the kids were playing up, but it all feels better now. Um, yeah, and quite deep actually, I think, because of the connection with music. And because we're particularly when we're walking for the full moon, we might talk about what's happened in the last 4 weeks. What can you leave behind and let go of? And what do you want to look forward to the next 4 weeks? So we're adding in the cycle into what's gone, what was good, what wasn't so good, and what are we looking forward to. And I think for it's great being in the moment, but it's also good to reflect. So that's something we do very naturally every 4 weeks when we're working with the full moon cycle.
And those of you that aren't necessarily into sort of the moon and what, but the full moon is a time to release.
Yeah.
I was going to say, but it could be anything. Whereas the new moon is a time for sort of new hopes, new thoughts. But you kind of, I'm a great believer that decluttering isn't just about getting rid of these books or those clothes. It's about decluttering thoughts. It's about decluttering grudges that we're holding on to from the past. It's it's letting go of some of the emotional stuff that we carry around us that fills our space. And actually, we need to release that in order for new things to come in, because it's like any space, isn't it? You can't just keep filling it full of things. You've got to let some stuff go, and it's not always easy.
And people tap into that at all levels. I mean, I'm acutely aware that some people just want to come out and move, and they don't necessarily think about the moon. But they did come to me 4 weeks ago, and they will come to me again in 4 weeks. So there's a cycle there for them anyway, regardless of whether they connect that to the moon. And it also, might be that they're noticing that they are holding stress from what's going on in their body. And we can physically release that by shaking, by moving, by loosening. And so they notice, as they're coming down the hill and we're coming back, I might say, what have you let go of? It might be tension in the shoulders. It might be a knot in the stomach. So it doesn't matter to me as the instructor whether people are necessarily tapping into emotions or thought patterns. They might just be tapping into, God, my shoulders feel so much better now I've moved and I'm coming back down the hill.
That's it, isn't it? It's there's a big focus on fitness and exercise and things like that, but for some people, just simple basic movements are much more beneficial, because they actually they target a much kind of more um, they're more subtle. I think that's what I want to say, is in that, like you say, your shoulders drop, and actually, when you've dropped your shoulders, when the tension's gone, you move much more freely. So sometimes it's those small movements that lead into bigger differences.
And you and I both know that we can have people come into a class fit or unfit, but by looking at their body, you can pretty much tell their story. Once people are past 40 plus, their life story shows in their body. And they might be fit, but it might still show, and they might be unfit and it still shows. So actually what we're doing for me helps release a lot of postural tension and postural habits that have come through what life might have thrown at people, rather than whether they've been exercising or not. Um, and I think another thing that I've seen is people are just much more keen to do more, because suddenly they've had an experience which has been pleasant, it's not been painful, it's been accessible, they've achieved something. So actually, they bring their friend back to the park another day of the week and do another walk.
Yeah, and that's
I've
it.
actually got two people tonight who are on holiday who have requested the playlist because they're going out for a walk
Yeah.
under the moon on their holiday.
And this is it. This
And
is
so
what
they will feel a bit part of it.
this is what we want, though, isn't it? We want activity to be accessible to people, because it's like you say, you see people. I can see people walking into classes, and there've been times where I've wanted to say, "Look, do you know what? You've got so much tension in you at the moment. There's really no point in you doing this class, because that tension is going to override your movement quality." And it's like, with things like yoga, you start with relaxation, whereas everything else we finish with relaxation. But actually, starting with relaxing movements and really tapping into your body and what feels where actually is so important, isn't it? Because it releases tension. So just starting to walk outside, you'll feel, we know with forest bathing, we know that it it has an impact on the vagus nerve, on our parasympathetic nervous system. It calms us down. So just starting to walk outside provides the relaxation that then means that the rest of your body will go, oh, okay, yeah, I get this.
And I think that's where I bring in the mindfulness and the somatic movement. So the first couple of tracks of music that we're playing are me suggesting that they notice the ground under their feet. They listen to the sound of their feet. And actually, we slow down massively right at the beginning. So people get the chance to notice, oh my goodness, have I hurried through my entire day? Am I still trying to hurry? I notice how many people have their hands in their pockets, which totally changes the posture on the shoulder. So it's like, I invite you to let your arms hang, let them swing naturally. Just let them hang as you walk and see what happens. And simple things like getting them to look at eye level and then slightly above. So they're actually moving their head from left to right, from up and down. Whereas, you and I know if we're in front of a computer all day, it's so easy to fix the head, neck, and shoulders. So all of those things come into my first sort of 10 minutes, really. Starting to notice the breath, starting to notice what temperature you are, and then how those things change. So constantly coming back to those things at different points in the session, so that they're becoming, they have a little bit more autonomy about what they notice about their own body and what they're aware of. So awareness, once we have awareness, we can make choices. If we haven't got awareness, we can't make a choice. But I think a lot of people, once they've got an awareness, they will make a judgment. So one of the things I teach, whether it's in my coaching or any of my work, is that there's an acceptance stage. We might be aware of something. Gosh, I'm holding a lot of tension in my shoulders today. But there needs to be an acceptance rather than a judgment, you know, about that. And then we can make a choice. And the choice might be take my hands out of pockets, let my arms dangle, or just shake my hands out, whatever works in that moment. So awareness, acceptance, and choice, big part of what I'm teaching throughout all my work, really.
It sounds amazing. And one of the things that's really coming through, this isn't just about you kind of inspiring other people. It sounds like there's an awful lot going on with you. So the project has obviously inspired and expanded your skills and creativity. So tell us a little bit more about that, because I know when I go for a long hike in beautiful surroundings, my creativity is just sparked. Um, so tell us a little bit more about how this is inspiring you.
Well, I think, as I said before, it's massively expanding my music choices. And that, reflects in my personal life as well as in my professional life. And I too have noticed, all of those different things with the seasons. So I think it's made me as a gardener a bit more subtle with what I'm noticing as well, rather than has my seed grown or not. I'm perhaps, I'm starting to get interested in permaculture about when I actually plant my seeds. Um, but also just that releasing of the creative, like taking the break off my creativity. I think I mentioned before, a lot of my prep time for tonight was yesterday creating the playlist. And what that allows me to do is be in the moment with the group that I'll have tonight. There'll be 7 people who haven't met with me before, probably another 7 or 8 who've only been out a couple of times. So as a space holder and a group leader, I need to be very in tune with what does that group need. And I think that's one of the things I've noticed about being inside. It almost expands my ability to connect with the music, the movement, and the people and the space. Yeah, I'm not really explaining it very well, but I've noticed a difference.
No,
Um,
yeah, but it is, isn't it? There's something about being that moving in nature that it's like it gives the brain a big drink of water, and refreshes it. It's like hydration for the brain. And I know people drink water, but it's kind of like it's a nutrients, it's nourishment for the brain, and it really seems to get the brain going. Yeah, do you know what? And I know, let's face it, how many of us, there's a natural instinct. We go, do you know what? I need to go for a walk and clear my head when we're having a bad day. We know that going outside for a walk is good for us, but we don't necessarily do it as often as we should. And I've got a little dog, so we get out in all weathers, and we love it, and I
what
love.
it sparked off in me, I was just thinking if I was teaching this session indoors and had been once a month for 2 years, as a teacher, I probably would have got a bit bored with it. And I'm not the slightest bit bored with it because every month is different weather, it's different things to look at. We're in a different season. So it's really given me that excitement and interest. And, I've been teaching for over 40 years. So I know, you'll know that feeling, Sarah, that, sometimes we could have done things a lot of times. But this has really given me that burst of impetus. And people say to me, "Oh, don't you want to go to a different place and walk there?" I'm like, "Well, yes, that's nice, but actually, it's the repetition of the same place in the different seasons and the different weathers that's actually been really interesting."
It might be the same path, but it's the surroundings are different every time, aren't they?
And I'm
Even
different
we,
every time, and the group are different every time.
yeah, and that's just amazing. How do you see the project developing in the future? Because it just sounds like such an amazing experience for people.
Well, I think as with anything, funding is often difficult, and the people who need this the most are not necessarily the ones who can pay to do it. So I'm always looking to tap into health projects, health and arts projects, wellness projects. But actually, I would love to train more teachers to do this, because I think there's a gap. I think there's plenty of fitness people and there's plenty of dance people who have a lot of the skills, but don't necessarily have the other parts. They're not used to working outside, or maybe they're not used to working with groups who have lower levels of fitness. So I think I'm in quite a unique position, both my teacher training background, but also the skills that cross over the walking projects, the dance, and the fitness. And I would love to be able to get some teacher training off the ground. A short weekend training would be enough, but it would mean people could hit the ground running rather than having to work it out. A dance teacher would never have probably done a risk assessment, possibly even indoors, let alone outdoors. And not every fitness person is used to working out in nature, or
or
looking
being
at using different music, for instance, or spoken words.
yeah, or going with the flow and things. It sounds like, it'd definitely be something I'd be interested in, and I think there's probably a few other people I know that would love to do something like this, because
I'm also at that stage of my career where I'm mentoring people and
yeah,
passing on. So now is the time to do those things. Even though I've been involved in teacher training for a long time, I don't want these skills to go. But it would be really helpful for people who want to hit the ground running with a session that actually was effective right from the beginning,
yeah. Well,
and pass on what I've learned.
it's definitely something I think, I'll make sure that all your details are in the information for the podcast. And I think you've given me a YouTube link to the Move in Nature experience. But where can people find you if they want to?
Well, I have a website, which is my name, FionaWinter.com. And I'm also Fiona Winter on Facebook, or Move in Nature.
That would be brilliant to find out.
Actually, I think, to be technically correct, it's Energy Moves in Nature, because Energy Moves is also a name that I work with. So they can find me
So
there.
what would be then a final message to everybody about being naturally active? And this is what I'm calling it, is naturally active, because we're active in a more natural sense, in the natural environment, but also in a more fluid, natural movement kind of way.
I would say be curious about your surroundings. Take time. Not every walk has to be fast. And that also, what I've noticed is when people slow their pace down, they're actually more willing to go up different terrain and go up elevations, because they're going at a pace that feels okay for them. And to turn around and look back at where you've been in all senses of the word. So tonight we'll be going up a hill, and at one point I'll invite everybody to stop and have a look, because the sky will be different behind you than it will be in front of you, just as life in your past is different from life in your future. So be curious.
It is. And even the same journey, if you walk along a path and you walk back the same path, it's a completely different perspective, isn't it? And it's so important to notice, I think, is something, isn't
Notice,
it?
be curious, enjoy it all. That's what kids do, isn't it? It's what we said right at the beginning.
Yeah.
That's what kids do. They're curious. What's this?
They notice everything. Yeah, you just move something slightly, it's like, move that and things. But we kind of,
And it's not too late.
yeah. Oh, it's brilliant.
My 80-year-olds who come along.
Oh, it just sounds amazing. And just thank you so much for coming on to talk about this. It's like, everybody knows that I'm passionate about, accessible movement, but also getting people outside into nature, particularly if people, like you said, are nervous about doing it on their own, or aren't quite sure if they're on their own. So being able to come out in a group and just be guided initially, and then start to find their own way and go out with other people and go out on their own, maybe, it's just so important, isn't it? It's such an important project. And
Yeah. We're singing from the
we
same hymn
definitely
book,
are.
Sarah.
We need, there's the old saying, more people, more active, more often, but more outside as well. And it's just, all ages, let's get outside and be active, because it isn't just the movement, it is that connection with nature. And all the good stuff that comes with it. It's brilliant, isn't it?
And right now,
And
the
they are
bluebells
just
are out.
beautiful, aren't they? And I don't care, all these people post photos, they're never, ever the same on a photograph. You can't photograph a lot of nature. Yeah, you need to see
You
it, like
need the
wild
smell of
garlic at the
it.
moment as well, for anyone who's interested in that. It's just the smell of it is just intense. Um, but Fiona, thank you so much for coming along. It's been really interesting, and I know it's something that there are probably a few fitnessy people out there who are thinking, "Gosh, actually, that's something I'd really like to get into." So I will make sure your details are there, and anybody who wants to contact Fiona, you can contact her directly or through me. So thank you very much again.
And thank you for inviting me,
No, it's been a
Sarah.
pleasure. You've been listening to Creating Active Lives with me, Sarah Bolitho, and my guest this week, Fiona Winter. And I have a feeling you'll come back on and talk a bit more about nature and things like that as well. So watch this space for the future, everybody. Thank you for listening to Creating Active Lives with me, Sarah Bolitho, and my guests. Join me each week for more on how to create and sustain everyday activity, and follow me online at Fitness Career Mentor or Fabulous if you're interested in career development and more on creating active lifestyles.